What happens when one of television's most fearless interviewers sits across from someone expecting nothing but soft questions and royal treatment? Well, you're about to find out, and trust me, this one gets explosive. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribing button and tell me in the comments what you think about celebrities who crumble under tough questions. Now let's get into the clash that had everyone talking. The studio lights blazed that evening, casting a sharp glow across the polished desk where Piers Morgan sat, adjusting his tie with the ease of a man who had grilled presidents, prime ministers, and plenty of prickly stars. His producer had warned him this guest might be difficult, but Piers thrived on difficult. That's what made him one of the most talked-about journalists on TV. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm and familiar. "Tonight we have a very special guest, someone who's been making headlines around the world, and I'm sure has plenty to say about recent events. Please welcome Meghan Markle." Polite applause followed as Meghan walked onto the set, her smile poised and practiced, her posture confident, the product of years of media training. She took her seat with the quiet expectation that this would be just another friendly chat. "Meghan, thank you for joining us," Piers said, leaning forward slightly, reading the tension in the room. "You've had quite a lot to say recently about your experiences, and I think our viewers would appreciate some honest answers to some direct questions." Her smile flickered, just for a second, but Piers noticed. "Of course, Piers, I'm always happy to set the record straight and speak my truth." "Your truth," Piers echoed, raising an eyebrow. "That's an interesting phrase. But if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about the truth, the actual facts." The air in the studio seemed to cool. Meghan shifted slightly, keeping her composure. "I think my truth is the truth, Piers. I lived it." "Absolutely," Piers replied smoothly, "and no one's questioning your experiences. But when public statements contradict documented facts, well, that's where journalism comes in." "That's where I come in," Meghan's jaw tightened. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," Piers said, opening a folder in front of him. "I'm asking direct questions. For example, your comments about your wedding. The Archbishop of Canterbury himself clarified that your supposed private garden ceremony didn't happen as you described." "That's a private matter," Meghan replied, her tone hardening. "It's not appropriate to discuss intimate details of my wedding," Piers paused. "But you discussed it publicly, Meghan. On international television. You can't make public claims and then declare them private when asked to verify them." The audience was silent now. This wasn't the friendly conversation Meghan had expected. "I think you're being unnecessarily aggressive," she said, her smile tightening. "I came here to have a conversation, not to be attacked." "Asking for accuracy isn't an attack," Piers said calmly. "It's journalism. If you make public claims, especially ones that affect others, they should be factual." "Wouldn't you agree?" Meghan's hands clasped in her lap, her knuckles whitening. "I think you're twisting my words." "I'm reading your words," Piers countered, holding up a transcript. "You said, and I quote, that you were married 3 days before the public ceremony in a private backyard exchange with the Archbishop of Canterbury. He has since stated it wasn't a legal wedding, only a private exchange of vows, yet you presented it as your actual marriage. Can you explain the discrepancy?" The question hung heavy in the air. Meghan's media polish began to crack, her tone turning defensive. "I think you're focusing on semantics rather than the emotional truth of what happened. What mattered was what it meant to us personally." "Semantics?" Piers leaned back, eyebrows raised. "Meghan, that's not semantics. That's a factual claim, and when the person you said officiated the ceremony says it didn't happen that way, that's not semantics either. That's a contradiction, and contradictions deserve clarification." The silence that followed was deafening. Meghan's composure was beginning to crack, subtly, but enough for a seasoned interviewer like Piers to notice. Her once effortless smile had turned rigid, her posture stiffening under the heat of scrutiny. "I don't appreciate being called a liar on national television," she said, her voice sharp. "I haven't called you anything," Piers replied evenly. "I'm simply asking you to clarify statements you made publicly, statements that appear to contradict the facts. If that feels unfair, perhaps you can help our viewers understand where the confusion lies." The tension in the studio was electric. What had begun as a standard celebrity interview was fast becoming something far more volatile. and Meghan was clearly unprepared for this level of direct challenge. "I think you're being deliberately obtuse," she snapped, her voice rising. "You know exactly what I meant." "Actually, I don't," Piers countered calmly. "And neither do our viewers. That's why we're having this conversation, to bring clarity to the issues you yourself made public." Meghan stood abruptly, then sat back down, clearly torn between walking out and keeping control. Off camera, her team exchanged worried glances, whispering among themselves. "I came here expecting a fair interview," she said, her tone now edged with anger. "Not an interrogation." "A fair interview includes fair questions," Piers replied, unflinching. "And fair questions sometimes demand uncomfortable answers. That's the nature of journalism, Meghan. You of all people should understand that." The battle lines were now drawn. The air in the studio had shifted completely. What moments ago had been a polished talk show now felt like a verbal battlefield. Piers, calm and composed, turned a page in his notes. "Let's move on," he said smoothly. "You've made serious allegations about racism within the royal family. These claims have had global repercussions. Can you offer any specific evidence to support them?" Meghan's eyes flashed, somewhere between anger and panic. "I lived through it, Piers. That should be evidence enough." "Personal experience is certainly valid," he acknowledged. "But when you accuse one of the most scrutinized institutions in the world of racism, allegations that have damaged Britain's reputation internationally, surely you can understand why people might want more than just your word." "So, now you're saying I'm lying about racism?" Meghan's voice rose sharply. Several crew members looked up from their equipment, startled by the sudden intensity. "I'm asking for specifics," Piers said steadily. "You've made broad accusations, but no concrete examples, no witnesses, no documentation. You mentioned conversations about your son's skin color, but refused to say who was involved or in what context. How can anyone properly address such serious claims without details?" Meghan shifted in her chair, her hands trembling slightly. "I protected them by not naming names. I could have, but I chose not to." "Protected them?" Piers leaned forward, his tone cutting through the silence. "Meghan, you accused them of racism on international television. You painted the entire royal family as discriminatory. How is that protection?" "I didn't name specific individuals," she fired back, her composure slipping further. "But you smeared the entire family," Piers countered. "You've allowed speculation to run wild. Millions now see the royals as racist, based solely on unsubstantiated claims. Surely you can see why that's a problem." Meghan's breathing quickened. The polished, media-trained poise she'd walked in with was unraveling before the cameras. "I don't have to prove anything to you or anyone else," she said, her voice tight. "My lived experience is valid." "Your experience is valid," Piers replied, his tone remarkably steady. "But your public accusations carry consequences beyond your personal truth. They've strained relationships across the Commonwealth. They've hurt people who've dedicated their lives to service. And they've divided public opinion over allegations no one can verify, because you refuse to provide specifics. So you're blaming me, Sam, for the reaction to racism?" Meghan's voice cracked slightly, emotion breaking through her control. "I'm asking you," Piers said firmly, "to take responsibility for how you've presented those allegations. If someone treated you the way you've treated the royal family, vague, damaging claims without evidence, how would you feel?" Meghan rose again, pacing behind her chair. The camera operators followed her with quiet precision as her team watched in alarm. "This," she said, voice trembling with anger, "this is exactly the kind of treatment that drove me away in the first place. You're more concerned with protecting the institution than protecting me." The words hung in the air, raw and trembling. The clash had gone far beyond an interview. It had become a reckoning. "I'm concerned about the truth," Piers said, his voice steady as stone. "And the truth is this. You've made serious public accusations without providing any evidence to support them. That's not protection, Meghan. That's just responsible journalism." "Responsible journalism?" Meghan repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. The sound echoed strangely in the tense studio. "You're just another part of the British establishment trying to silence me." Piers paused, letting the words hang in the air before replying with quiet precision. "Meghan, I've spent my career challenging the establishment, holding powerful people to account and asking difficult questions, no matter how uncomfortable they might be. That's exactly what I'm doing right now. By attacking a woman of color who's trying to speak her truth? Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. By asking a public figure who's made serious allegations to provide evidence for them. Piers countered smoothly. Your race and gender don't exempt you from scrutiny when your claims affect millions. True equality means being held to the same standards as everyone else. The words struck like a physical blow. Meghan stopped pacing, staring at him. Her mouth opened, then closed again, searching for a response. That's completely unfair, she finally managed. You don't understand what it's like to be in my position. You're right, Piers said evenly. I don't. But I do understand what it means to be a journalist, and what it means to have a duty to the truth. And that's what our viewers deserve. Meghan slowly returned to her seat, but the confident, composed woman who'd walked onto the set was gone. In her place sat someone struggling to keep control. Piers glanced down at his notes. Let's talk about your relationship with your father, he continued, tone even but deliberate. You've publicly distanced yourself from the man who raised you, who paid for your education, who walked you down the aisle, yet you've embraced a family you say mistreated you. Can you help our viewers understand that? My father betrayed me, Meghan said quickly, too quickly. He sold stories to the press. He staged photographs. He chose money over his daughter. He made mistakes, Piers agreed. But by most accounts, he was also under intense media pressure. He had health issues, and he was navigating an impossible situation. Did you ever consider that maybe he needed your support, rather than your silence? Meghan's face flushed crimson. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know the full story. Then tell me, Piers said simply. Help me understand how a man who sacrificed so much for your success suddenly became someone you could erase from your life. He made his choices, she said coldly, and I made mine. Even after his heart attack, even when he was clearly struggling, Piers pressed. You chose to maintain a relationship with a father-in-law you barely knew over the man who raised you? The question landed hard. Meghan's composure cracked completely. Her eyes glistened, though the tears looked more like frustration than heartbreak. You're being cruel, she whispered. I'm being honest, Piers replied, his tone soft but unwavering. And sometimes honesty is uncomfortable, but it's necessary. The studio had become a pressure cooker. No one moved. The crew watched in stunned silence, fully aware they were witnessing something unprecedented. Meghan sat rigid in her chair, tears trembling in her eyes, while Piers maintained the same calm professionalism that had defined his career. Meghan, he said at last, his tone gentler now, though still edged with purpose. I understand this is painful, but these are questions millions of people are asking. When you make public statements that affect lives and reputations, surely you understand they'll be examined. Examined or attacked, she shot back, voice breaking. Because there's a difference, and you've crossed that line. I've asked for evidence to support serious allegations, Piers said evenly. I've asked for clarification on contradictions. I've asked about relationships you've already discussed publicly. Those aren't attacks, Meghan. Those are questions any responsible journalist would ask. Meghan wiped her eyes, smearing her makeup. You're just like all the rest. You can't stand that I spoke out, that I refused to stay silent. Actually, Piers said, leaning back slightly, his expression unreadable, I admire people who speak out when they can back up what they say. I've built my career on speaking out, Piers began, his tone measured, eyes locked on his guest. On challenging authority, on refusing to accept easy answers. But speaking out comes with responsibility. It means being prepared to defend your statements, to provide evidence for your claim, and to face scrutiny. That's the price of having a platform. I don't need to defend my lived experience to you or anyone else, Meghan shot back, her voice rising, almost shaking. Around them, a few crew members exchanged uneasy glances. The temperature in the studio seemed to climb by the second. But you do need to defend public allegations that damage other people's reputations, Piers countered, his tone firm but calm. You've accused people of racism without offering specifics. You've claimed you were denied mental health support, yet the palace maintains records showing multiple offers of assistance. You've portrayed yourself as a victim while cutting off family members who stood by you for years. These aren't private experiences, Meghan. These are public statements with public consequences. Meghan suddenly stood, her chair rolling back across the studio floor. I'm done with this, she said, trembling. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by someone with an agenda. My only agenda, Piers replied, still seated, his voice steady as ever, is the truth. And if that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should ask yourself why. Because you're twisting everything I say, Meghan nearly shouted. You're taking my words out of context, minimizing my experiences and protecting a racist institution instead of demanding justice. I'm asking for evidence of racism, Piers said, his tone tightening. You keep labeling the monarchy a racist institution, yet you've never provided a single concrete example. You've mentioned conversations about your son's skin color, but refused to say who said what, when, or in what context. How can anyone address allegations like that without details? Meghan's hands shook as she gathered her belongings from the table beside her. I don't have to prove anything to you. The very fact that you demand proof shows exactly the kind of person you are. The kind who believes in evidence-based reporting, Piers raised an eyebrow. The kind who thinks serious allegations should be backed by facts? Yes, Meghan, that's exactly the kind of person I am. That's what journalists are supposed to be. You're not a journalist, she spat. You're a bully with a television show who gets off on tearing people down. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Piers didn't flinch, but something hardened in his eyes. Meghan, he said quietly, I've interviewed terrorists, dictators, and prime ministers. I've confronted corruption and challenged power at every level. If asking you to provide evidence for your own claims makes me a bully, then I'll proudly wear that label. Meghan's face twisted with fury. How dare you compare me to terrorists and dictators? I'm not comparing you to anyone, Piers replied, his tone razor-sharp but steady. I'm explaining that difficult questions are part of serious journalism. No matter who sits in that chair, you don't get special treatment because you're upset or because you think scrutiny equals bullying. This interview is over, Meghan declared, yanking at the microphone clipped to her dress. I won't be subjected to this. You're free to leave, Piers said, making no move to stop her. But walking away from tough questions doesn't make them disappear. It only makes it look like you can't answer them. Meghan froze mid-motion, his words cutting through her anger. For a brief second, it looked like she might sit back down, but instead she tore the microphone free. The sharp crack of feedback echoed through the studio. You know what? She said coldly. This will backfire on you. People will see this for what it is. A powerful man attacking a woman for daring to speak truth to power. They'll see a journalist asking legitimate questions of a public figure who made serious allegations. Piers replied evenly. And they'll see someone who couldn't answer them, walking away instead. Let the viewers decide what that means. Meghan grabbed her purse, turned on her heel, and stormed toward the exit. At the door, she stopped, glaring back one last time. You're going to regret this. Piers, this isn't over. It never is, he said quietly. But truth has a way of coming out, no matter who tries to bury it. As Meghan vanished off stage, her team scrambling to follow, Piers straightened his tie and turned back to the camera. Composed as ever. Well, he said dryly. I think that speaks for itself, doesn't it? He leaned forward slightly, addressing the audience directly. When public figures make serious accusations, they should be prepared to defend them with facts, not emotional outbursts or accusations of bullying when challenged. That's what journalism is for, to ask the questions that need to be asked, even when they're uncomfortable, even when the answers don't come. He paused, letting the silence settle. Because the truth matters more than anyone's comfort. The studio was silent except for the soft hum of equipment. A masterclass in journalism had just collided head-on with a masterclass in evasion, and only one of them had stayed standing when the dust cleared.